All right, welcome everybody to part 2 of our Farm to School and Youth Leadership Curriculum webinar series. And this one is about strengthening farm to school. So we're very happy you could join us. Maybe some of you joined us on our first one last week. But if not, you can still jump right in today. So before we get started, I just wanted to do some logistical information here. So if you look at the control panel that's on your screen, just know that you can ask questions at any time during the webinar by typing your question into the text box that's located within the panel, and then you just press the send button and we'll be able to get those throughout the webinar, and then we'll have a time at the end of the webinar for Q&A where we're going to answer as many of those as we can. I also wanted to remind you all that if you have any trouble with the sound, you can always switch from your computer's mic to phone in to listen as well. So just look at the audio panel of your control panel, and that has information about how to call in. And also let you know that we're going to be recording this webinar, so it will be available after the fact. So don't feel like you need to take a bunch of notes during the webinar itself, because this will be available afterwards for you to review again and again. So today we are discussing IATP's Farm to the School Youth Leadership Curriculum. And we developed this curriculum, we published it last year. The purpose of the curriculum was that we wanted to empower high school teachers to bring farm to school into the classroom and also educate their students about local food and agriculture issues while linking them with their local farmers, but also give them a leadership role in their school as far as their farm to school programs were, and give them ownership and commitment to that program and help them to help create the program for their school. So at the same time that they'd be learning, they'd also be doing some of the legwork that can make it difficult for school staff or food service staff to start a program themselves, because as we all know, they're very busy. Part 1, which we did last week, we talked a lot about the general benefits of farm to school and the underlying philosophy of our curriculum and how we tied those benefits into the curriculum and kind of wove them throughout the different activities that we had. And today we're going to get really into the details of what the activities are and what the structure of the curriculum actually is, and more details of implementation. And I know that last time we got a lot of people that were asking implementation questions, so I think this will be really great to get some of your questions. If you have specific questions about your own context, we can address those today, and we're going to be giving a lot of information about how the curriculum works today. So we're very happy to be joined on the webinar by Vanessa Harold. She is the Farm to School Specialist at the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems, and she's also the Great Lakes Region Farm to School Network Coordinator. She also is the coordinator for the School Food Focus Upper Midwest Regional Learning Lab. So she does a lot of different things around school food and farm to school, and she's an excellent resource for all of you today. So if you have questions, you are very lucky that you can ask them directly to one of the superstar experts of the country on farm to school. And then myself, I'm Erin. I work at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, and I'm the Farm to Institution Senior Program Associate here. So first of all, I just wanted to get a sense from those of you on the line here, how much do you know about farm to school already, just so we have the context of what you all know. So if you look at your control panel, there is a poll that you can fill out to indicate how much you know about farm to school, how familiar you feel with farm to school already. All right. Oh, good. So we're seeing, yeah, a lot of you feel pretty familiar. We've got the most people responding that you feel fairly familiar, and then we've got 22% a little bit, and also 22% very. So that's great. We've got some varied knowledge on the webinar today. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Sometimes there's a little delay when we do these polls to get to the next slide here. Okay. So just some context and background about why we developed this curriculum. there are some challenges with doing farm-to-school initiatives in schools, and particularly we hear from school food service staff that sometimes it can add prep time. It can be difficult for them to figure out the pricing and budget. And then a really big one that we heard from farmers, we've done some surveys at IATP of different producers that have tried to work with institutions, and a lot of feedback that they would give is that it's very difficult for the food service directors to actually connect with the farmers and find each other. So for both sides, they say that it's difficult to connect with each other. We also heard a lot of feedback from school staff about wanting to build more educational opportunities around the program. So they would do a lot of work to bring the food to the cafeteria, but it was important to them that they also shared the information about where that food was coming from with their students in their school, and they wanted more opportunities to really dig in and have the kids understand their local food system and why it was important, why they were valuing doing a farm-to-school initiative at their school. So those were kind of two main reasons that led to us wanting to develop this curriculum. And if you attended our webinar last week, we had Natasha Mortensen on the webinar, and she is actually a high school agriculture educator in Morris, Minnesota, and she had been doing really wonderful educational opportunities in her classroom where she would actually have the students do activities where they would learn about their local food system while building their school's initiative around farm to school. And so we wanted to take what she was doing and really build it into a formal curriculum. So that was the impetus of putting this together. So you can see here the curriculum is pretty neatly organized, and that's kind of where Vanessa came in. She really lent her eye to making an overarching design of the curriculum so that it flows very nicely along with the same way that you would want to build a farm-to-school initiative in your school. Either build it from scratch or expand something that you're already doing. These steps that are in the lessons actually follow the path that you would use to start or expand a farm-to-school initiative in your own school. So I did want to let you know one thing that we heard, we get a lot of questions about, oh, can I use this in a context outside of a high school? And the answer is definitely yes. So Natasha was very deliberate about having activities that could be used as a standalone if you're in some kind of after-school program. Also, I've had a lot of interest from younger teachers who teach younger students. So we designed the curriculum actually with 11th and 12th grade high school students in mind. But I have had a lot of interest from people who teach younger students, and I think that it definitely could be adapted to teach younger students, and you could actually use activities in settings other than schools as well. So don't feel like this doesn't apply to you if you're not a high school teacher, although if you are, that would be a perfect thing because we did develop it with that in mind. And it fits into a lot of different interdisciplinary types of classes. So there's agriculture, family and consumer sciences, social studies, economics, health, science. There are a lot of different topics that are covered. So it's a very diverse bunch of information in here that could be applicable to a lot of different situations. And I did want to show you the way that it's designed. So this is just a sample page from the curriculum. There are 6 lessons, as you just saw, and each lesson contains a summary of the lesson at the beginning and a list of the activities and outcomes that you want from those lessons. It also has facilitator preparation notes for the teacher and a materials and equipment list for the teacher to be prepared from the very beginning as well, and also lists of additional resources such as links, books, videos, etc. Vanessa was excellent at helping us come up with lots of resources because she has her finger on the pulse of farm-to-school resources nationally, so that was great. It also has detailed facilitator descriptions of the core activities of the curriculum, and then it also contains additional recommended activities if you want to go even further. And each of the activities, it gives you an estimate of how long they'll take, so you can look at that. It's an estimate, so you could make it take longer or shorter if you want to. it's pretty flexible that way. And we did align the curriculum to national and Minnesota academic standards. So if you are a high school teacher, there is a reference for you for every single lesson about which academic standards are met by the lesson. It also has worksheets and handouts that you can make copies of and give directly to the students. So there's a lot of information. It's pretty comprehensive in there. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Vanessa, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself, and then we'll go through the curriculum together, and she'll tell you about the activities that are contained within and the structure. And then I'll talk together at the end with some questions.
Well, thank you, Erin, and good afternoon to everybody. I hope people are staying warm today and over the next couple of days. I am very honored to be a part of this webinar today and also a part of this project. It was a really personally satisfying project to take part in, and I think that the product is really valuable to students and teachers interested in Farm to School. As Erin said, my name is Vanessa Harold. I am academic staff at the UW-Madison Center for Integrated Ag Systems. I am a Farm to School outreach specialist. I wear many hats here. One of them is as the Great Lakes Regional Lead for the National Farm to School Network, which is how I know and get the chance to work with Erin in a couple of capacities. And then I also do work on Wisconsin-specific training and technical assistance around Farm to School, creating new resources and working with state level and on-the-ground partners to create tools to get Farm to School moving at our state level. And as Erin mentioned, I do work with School Food Focus on the Upper Midwest Regional Learning Lab. And I have been working on Farm to School and farming issues for a while now and cut my teeth in the school environment at the Abernathy Garden of Wonders in Portland, Oregon for a couple of years. And I have that understanding of what it's like to be in the classroom and working with teachers and working with food service and kind of being that intermediary. And I was trying to wear that lens and that hat when working on this curriculum project. And I was really excited when, gosh, was it 2 or 3 years now, when Erin reached out and asked if I wanted to participate in this project, and I was really, really excited. There aren't many tools like this curriculum that connect students with Farm to School in such an engaging way, but also in such an educational way. And I think the structure of the curriculum really gives good support to make all of this work. So I'm excited to be a part of this project and happy to be here today. So we're going to just kind of run through the content and structure of the tools and lessons themselves, and I think we're going to do questions at the end. So if you have any questions, you can scribble them down and we can get to them later. And there's a lot of information in here, so this really is just kind of a preliminary glance. So lesson 1, getting to know Farm to School. This really is an introductory chapter, and I think, as Erin said before you, this can be used in a variety of ways, and it can be used in individual chapters. And I think this chapter in particular is a great way to introduce students to Farm to School itself. So in this chapter, students are introduced to the concept of Farm to School as the foundation for the curriculum and as a principle, but also the principle on which all of the other leadership and skill building activities will be based. And through vocabulary of Farm to School, reviewing different models of Farm to School, because as we know, Farm to School is way more than just one way of doing things. And beginning to converse about food production and food systems, students become comfortable with the basic concepts of Farm to School, including the benefits and the goals. So this first lesson really lays out the basics of what we're trying to achieve, what this Farm to School thing is. And I think for students it can be really intuitive, or for students it can be a first glimpse into the food system conversation. I think a lot of that has to do with what food service and what the school environment is like for students already. So for an example, in this lesson, but throughout all of the lessons, they are chock full of activities. And in this activity, we are asking students to think on your feet and create a Farm to School elevator speech. So as you can see, these activities aren't just about teaching students about Farm to School, but also giving them a lot of these really important leadership skills. So as students understand and digest what Farm to School is, you're asking them to turn it back and create an elevator speech. So the concept of an elevator speech is really having a short snippet of what farm to school it is and why it's important. If you were trapped in an elevator with somebody, or riding from the first floor to the fifth floor, you would have just that much time to explain to them what farm to school was. So this lesson, this activity, teaches kids kind of what this elevator speech is, gets them thinking about being an advocate for the things that they believe in, being an advocate for the projects that they're working on, and learning how to start that dialogue, especially with folks who might be older than them or have different positions of power, and that's part of the leadership dynamic here. And I was working with a group of adults a couple weeks ago, and we were working on elevator speeches, and it's such a great activity for getting people to kind of be able to synthesize what is important about the project that they're working on and be able to describe it to somebody else. So there are a variety of activities that not only explain what farm to school is, but also get kids to be synthesizing and processing that information. And so from there, we will move on to resources. So something that we really wanted to do here was hone in on the resources that are helpful for you. I don't know if anybody has been out searching for farm to school resources in the world, but there are abundance of them now. There are lots, and it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. So what we have tried to do here is for each of the lessons really try and pare down the relevant resources that will be helpful to give you as an educator some background information if this is a field that is new to you, but that will also be easily accessible for your students to learn from, or for your students to access themselves and use as part of their self-discovery in this process. So there is a list of resources, and it's kind of nice to have really valuable ones in one place. And for this introductory lesson, we're looking at the National Farm to School Network, the USDA Farm to School webpage, the USDA Census, and some of the toolkits that have the really strong basic farm to school information, like the University of Minnesota Farm to School toolkit that is on the screen right now. So the first lesson really is trying to give everybody that foundation. And there is also a lot of vocabulary learning and usage, which is pretty helpful so that everybody is on the same page about what farm to school is and what we're talking about when we're talking about farm to school and sort of the food system. And also, what I really like about this curriculum is that it comes with worksheets. And if you are in a classroom setting, whether you are a classroom teacher or you are an educator who comes in to work in the classroom, you know that one of the hardest, most time-consuming things is that feeling of recreating the wheel when it comes to worksheets. Like you have all of these great concepts, you have this lesson plan, but how do you communicate it to students? And the great thing about this curriculum is that it comes with the handouts and worksheets that you can use with students. And I think that that makes it a very, very incredibly helpful tool to be able to have, to not sit down at your computer and create a framework to do that kind of thing. It's already provided for you. Lesson 2, getting to know your local food system. This was a really fun lesson to work on because this is taking that step back from farm to school, and it's looking at farm to school within the context of the larger food system. So what is farm to school? Let's step back. Why does it matter? So students learn the concept of a food system. We might all know what a food system is, but for students, looking at a systems approach to things and how something like food works within a system itself can be a new way of thinking of things. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that. And then students start to learn more and think more about their own local food system. So that big step backwards to take a look at the big picture, and then we start to hone in on what is our local food system. So it spans the food system language and scope in this lesson. And then students really do get to talk about what is their food system producing throughout the year. Students understand what their food system is, what their local agricultural products are, and start to think about that sense of seasonality. And it helps students identify opportunities to start expanding farm to school activities. So at the end kind of engages that link between farm to school and the local food system. And it gives students that inkling that our food can and is grown locally, okay, we've got the farm to school piece, we've got the local food piece, and students get to start engaging in how they want to make those connections, which they will be learning how to do later on. So students talk about, what are farm to school foods? And that's through the lens of what food is being served in our cafeteria now and what foods are being grown in our region, however we define our region now. So we definitely talk about farm to school foods being fruits and vegetables. I think that's something that we really talk about frequently when we think about farm to school, but also it includes grains and whole grains and meat and cheeses and dairy and wild rice and dry beans. So getting students to think outside of the box a little bit. For an example activity, students think about what's local and when. Students have the opportunity to research the foods that are produced locally, and locally can be defined however your school sees fit, and research when they're in season. And there are links and resources for finding your super local or your state local seasonality charts, and some that include the non-fruit and vegetable items that we talked about. So the thing that's great about this curriculum is it points you in the right direction to find the resources that you need. And if you are in Minnesota or if you're in the upper Midwest, you're really going to have all of the right tools and links to your local seasonality charts and your local farm guides and things like that. So we try to really put those resources at your fingertips, but make it flexible enough so that if you wanted to be looking at other resources or you're approaching this from another geography across the country, that it gives you a sense of where to go looking for the stuff you need, especially if this is a field that's new to you. Another example activity is one that was printed with permission from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture and University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension. It's called the Hometown City Exercise, and students learn about the multiplier effect of local purchasing by looking at scenarios when citizens in a town purchase locally and when they don't purchase locally, and then they do the math to see how much money stays in the town when the citizens are purchasing locally. So there's a little bit of economics in here. You can see how we're bringing in more than just local food, but how it's tied to other pieces of the curriculum and giving students these kind of first-hand experiences and new perspectives on buying local and the impact of buying local within the school, but also what happens when we look at that in the broader community. And we also have an activity called Steps in the Food Chain, where students look at all of the activities involved from getting food from field to their final destination and kind of have to put all of those steps in order to get a thought of the food system and how it actually operates, because there is a lot that happens between planting that seed and having it show up in the lunchroom. So getting kids to have a little bit more transparency and thought between all of the labor and the transportation and everything that's taking place to get their food where it needs to go. Lesson 3. This is where we start getting a little bit technical. School lunch, how does it really work? And for anybody who is familiar with school lunch, you know that it is complicated and that school food service staff and nutrition directors are magic makers for doing what they do and serving nutritious lunches to students with all of the logistics and challenges and requirements put upon them. So we try to distill the entire process of school lunch and all of its intricacies into a way that students could understand. And this, much like understanding the food system, gives students a chance to look at something that maybe they see every day, that they take for granted, and dig a little bit deeper. So in this lesson, students gain a broad understanding of their school meal program, including where the food for the school meal program comes from and how it's prepared, and that can be many, many different ways, as we all know. And students will learn about the National School Lunch Program itself, a little bit about the structure of that big program, and students will also learn how to assess your school's current engagement in farm-to-school activities and to learn how to interact with staff from the school's nutrition services. So we're really biting off a big chunk here in this chapter on getting students to be thinking about what's actually happening within their school, within their food service. What's great is that there is interaction here between food service and students, and so you are invited to ask your school's district food service professionals to visit the class during this lesson, and that's hopefully the entree to opening a little bit of dialogue between students and school food service. So in this lesson, one of the activities is what's on my tray, and Students work in small groups to research the origins of items from real meals on their school lunch menu. And so there's so many different ways that this can be done. In theory, where are these things grown, or specifically figuring out where was the food source for the meal that day. But as you can see, especially on that very tasty looking plate, when we start looking at the actual food on the tray, the whole grains in the roll, the tomatoes in the meatball sauce, the milk itself, we can start asking big questions about the food system and what is happening within the cafeteria. Another example activity from this lesson is interviewing food service professionals, in which case the students can have the chance to learn about school meal nutrition requirements and regulations, which can be a lot to learn, and where students can walk through a farm-to-school assessment to find out what's already happening. So this is the option to have food service director come to your classroom, or this can also be done as some other kind of correspondence where these questions can be asked and somebody can answer them. Lots and lots of information that might be getting very technical for students in this lesson, and we tried to really distill it down in a way that made students be able to understand it and understand that they're participating in something that can feel big and overwhelming, but that using these leadership skills and these ways of engaging, that there is a chance for them to become part of and influence part of this system. Lesson 4, identifying opportunities to make a farm-to-school plan. And this is where that leadership piece comes through again. And allowing students to take everything that they have learned about farm-to-school and what it is, and the food system and what it is, and how their school food system itself operates, and start to identify where their opportunities are. So in this lesson, students apply what they have learned about farm-to-school principles to their own school environment, so really taking that lens of digesting and applying what they've learned and seeing how it relates to their own environment. And then they start to identify farm-to-school foods that could potentially be incorporated into school meals, given your school's kitchen facilities. So there's so many things to unpack even in just that one idea, but that means that students are familiar with what has been or what is on their menu or what has been served. They have a sense of what their school food service kitchen is like, so what the facilities are like. Does everything come from a central kitchen and get dispersed to schools around the district? Does each school have its own facility? Do people use knives and cutting boards, or does everything have to come in pre-processed? So students will hopefully have garnered some of this information and can learn about what would actually be of use to their school food environment. And then students are also thinking about the availability of local foods grown and other factors. Some of the pieces kind of learned in that lesson too, like what does grow in our climate, and when are those tomatoes available versus when are those peas available. And students are looking forward in the next lesson, they'll continue to use this information to start to connect with farmers and identify nearby sources for what we're calling these priority foods. So the foods that students have hopefully worked with food service directors to learn as these are priority foods that we could use your help getting into the classroom. So this is an opportunity for students to really assess where you are and where you'd like to be. And of course, there's a lot of student engagement there, because that means what do students see and where do students want to be? Where do students see room for change? How can we engage with everybody to make this a collaborative process? An example activity from this lesson is students defining local. From the USDA perspective and from the school perspective, USDA doesn't designate a definition for local, and it's up to each school to define local for themselves. So that can be pretty small, it can be a state or a region, but in this activity students define local, and then they work in small groups to create a Venn diagram showing the overlap of foods that are raised nearby to them and those that are commonly used by their school. And that's using real menus from the school and the information they have previously researched on their school food and on seasonality. So not only are students having this information they've learned about the food system and about how their school operates, but using some critical thinking skills to start to put the pieces together. What do we want to be able to use? What can we use in our school environment? And then students take this information and potentially share it with a school food service director. And that's the place of saying, this could be a collaborative process, and we want to help. We see that this is a place where we might be able to lend our hand here. Oftentimes food service directors are approached to do farm to school activities, and there's so much on their plates, literally and metaphorically, that taking on one more thing feels overwhelming. And part of the structure of this curriculum is to make that request to change or modify something that's happening in the cafeteria and not make it feel like a burden, but make it feel like it's a community effort and there's actually support and other people to do the work to make that change. So somebody to be doing the research on the back end while providing a little bit of motivation to get it done. Lesson 5, communicating with producers of local foods. So you can see sort of a transition and an escalation in the communication and the leadership here. So in Lesson 1, students are getting familiar with the idea of an elevator pitch and talking to other people, and then people are talking about, students are talking about this within their class, talking with the food service director, and in this lesson we kind of step outside of the bounds of schools into communicating with producers of local food. So students in this lesson will think through the important information that they would need to gather from farmers, and they will seek out local producers and then try to make farmer-school connections. Students will develop scripts and tools for communicating with producers by phone or email and record the information they collect from their engagement with growers, and there's worksheets for these. And students will aggregate their information and share it with the school food service staff or the class. So this is a very exciting and very brave lesson for students, especially if you are anything like I was in high school, which was extremely shy and sort of terrified of having to reach out to new people that I didn't know. But this gives students a really safe framework to feel like they are experts and have peer support and classroom support to make a phone call, to send an email to a producer and start asking questions. And I think one of the most important activities in this lesson is that students need to think through the important information they need to gather from farmers. So they have been immersed in this enough to know that they know what questions to ask. So what does this farmer grow? When is it available? What quantity do they have? When could they deliver it? And that hopefully students are thinking through these questions on their own because they understand farm to school and they understand the food system and they understand their school food service itself. So this is kind of the big step outside of the school world lesson. And students really do have the goal of making that connection. So for the example activity, students research local producers that grow these priority items that have been identified by the students and potentially with the support of school food service. And we teach where to find those local producers, and that's talked about in the food system and the local food system lessons. And then students work with the food service director to make the list of information that is needed from potential vendors and to create a list of questions. And so that also can get into things like price and availability and delivery schedules, and students are learning about the production side, but also what's needed by the school food service side. And it can feel very collaborative if you have the opportunity to work with a food service who's really into having the support of students and sees the benefit of it. And then students practice their professional emails and phone skills and have the chance to set up interviews with farmers. So it's not necessarily that a student is just calling a farmer point blank and asking this information, but potentially setting up a time to have this conversation or inviting the farmer into the classroom to answer these questions. All the skills that we have to learn about being adults of respecting people's time and figuring out when we can engage with people to get the information that we need. And then students compile the information and provide it to the food service director. So students aren't making contracts with farmers, or they're not putting out bids. They're merely collecting really useful information that can help a food service director or a food service staff feel a little bit more connected with local food and where it's coming from and not have to do all of the legwork themselves. And I think the idea of the student engagement really makes it more motivating for a farmer or food service director to participate, because you're hearing this demand, you're hearing this need from the students who are eating the food themselves, and then any information they have gets handed off to the food service director.
Vanessa, I was just going to mention that last week when Natasha was presenting, she was talking about how impressed she was with her students because they could do these, it's really professional skills that they're building. And I did mention last week that I met some of her students, and you could tell that they had this training because they really had a lot of confidence. We actually co-presented with her students on this curriculum, and they were the ones telling about their experience, and it was really empowering for them. So I feel like this lesson of the curriculum is one of my favorites because it really gives them that real leadership opportunity where they're doing the work that needs to be done to build the Farm to School initiative in their school.
Thanks, Erin. I think that that's a really wonderful example, and I think it's a real strength of this curriculum that students are doing real work and they're doing it outside of the school environment, which students don't always have the chance to do. But Erin, thank you for that, that example. I think that really is illuminating. Lesson 6, final lesson, increasing student awareness and engagement in Farm to School. So in this lesson, students will draw on all the information that they have learned in their previous lessons to communicate about Farm to School with the school and larger community. So really wearing that kind of advocate and educator and leader hat. Students will learn techniques to communicate with their community and will create a campaign to promote and engage fellow students in Farm to School issues. So this can be a standalone activity if you just have a Farm to School program that you want to be promoting without necessarily doing a lot of the other activities. Students will also take stock of how Farm to School issues have evolved at their school over the time of this course and will make recommendations for future Farm to School activities. So there is an assessment component to this as well, which really gives students the opportunity to see the impact of their actions and shows you that the work that they do is meaningful and can have an impact. So the note here is that even if your school does not currently have an active Farm to School program, students can reflect on their experience and make recommendations for the future. So if you go through this activity and there aren't significant outcomes that can be seen in the lunch line, there's still the opportunity for students to assess what kind of movement their work has done. So a big piece of this is promotion, and these are really important skills for students to be practicing as well. But an example activity is that students developed a slogan or a logo or branding for their Farm to School program and implement a communications plan, so developing what that plan is, to spread the word in their school about Farm to School. And students can engage in internal school community activities through posters or case tests or announcements, things like school newspaper articles, or they can engage with the outside community through things like letters to the editor, public events, partnerships with local grocery stores, and things like that. So it gives a pretty wide framework for learning about promotion and sharing the sort of the storytelling and the successes of an event. And the signs pictured are promotional materials, and they are available on the IATP website in the Farm to School section. And I believe that that is my last slide, and we hand it back over to Erin.
Great. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm realizing that I kind of gave the heavy lifting of the webinar over to Vanessa. So thank you so much for going through that content. And it's really inspiring to hear you talk about that because it makes me realize how much there is in the curriculum. It's kind of difficult to encapsulate. Even within this webinar, we had to do it as a series of 2 different webinars because we couldn't fit everything into one. So that was really great to hear. I want to remind everybody on the line that we would love for you to send in some questions. We're almost to the Q&A part of the webinar here, so please type those in and press send, and then we'll get to those in just a moment here. And if you want to ask about your specific situation, if you're doing some Farm to School type activities, or if you're wondering how to get started either in a high school or in a different context, we would be happy to answer your specific questions as well. So one thing that I did want to add into this webinar, you probably noticed as Vanessa was explaining that the different content items in the lessons do build on each other, and you can see how they really align with each other to construct a logical flow of activities that you can do to build or expand a Farm to School initiative in your own context. And because some of you might be thinking that way, I did want to include some just Farm to School best practices in this webinar as well. So these are things to keep in mind if you're trying to do a Farm to School initiative yourself. And I do always like to remind people that you can start small. So sometimes when people look at the curriculum, they might be thinking that you have to do everything all at once, and they might be a little intimidated by that. But it's totally possible to just start with one local item that you're purchasing, or even just doing it as a taste test. And in some cases, maybe you're in a situation where you can't quite figure out with the food service director how to start actually present or doing the local food procurement in your meals. But it is possible to do educational activities that start that idea, the kind of thinking about food systems that is also really beneficial for students. So don't feel like you have to do everything all at once, but just choose to take some small steps, and then you can build on those as you go. And then Vanessa already mentioned, but there are so many resources that are already available to you, so you don't need to feel like you need to reinvent the wheel. And in our curriculum, I am really proud that it is a really good resource. Even if you're not going to be doing the entire curriculum, I encourage you to check it out, because every single lesson has a list of additional resources that are related to the content of that lesson. So please check that out. And then many of those are recommendations of websites where you'll find even more resources, and there's just going to be a whole bunch of stuff that will be ready for you to help you expand your own initiative. One other thing is that the reason why we aligned our curriculum with educational standards is that we knew that it would be easier, instead of creating an entirely new system of evaluation for the program, to make it fit with what teachers already have to do. And you might have similar things in your own settings that you can think about and incorporate into your own Farm to School initiative and education plan. It's definitely much easier if you incorporate these types of themes into what you're already doing instead of trying to create an entirely new thing. Another thing that is very important is to think about the culture of the community that you're working with. So part of what's great about local foods is that they actually embody some of the cultural identity of the community in which they're grown, and that's one of the important things about them. So if you have a lot of students that are of a certain culture, it's great if you can use that culture to make a connection and maybe use some local foods to cook some dishes that are from the culture of the students that are there. I feel like that always helps to make it more real for them and give them an entryway to the program that is very natural for them. The other thing is, if you can get locally grown foods, that is a key part of doing Farm to School. And like I said, it could be just a taste test if you can't go full-blown with the meals right away. But we also say, in addition to eating, you can do lots of different types of activities. And I think while Vanessa was telling us about the example activities from the curriculum, you could tell there's math in there, there's social studies, you can do art activities. That whole thing about the communications plan is really, there are business and professional skills in there, and also marketing skills. There's design elements, artistic elements. So there are a lot of things, and as you know, children learn in different ways. So if you have lots of different types of activities, that gives different kids an opportunity to engage at different levels and enjoy the program in their own way. So that's a really wonderful thing about Farm to School, is it really can hook into a lot of different types of skills and activities. And if you have the opportunity to have a garden, that's always a great compliment. Some of the schools with the older kids, which part of the reason why this curriculum is really unique is that it's engaging with the older high school students. And most resources that I see are really targeting more of the even the grade school level. So I've seen that there are high school students that have really something that is a little bit too elaborate to even call a garden. They really have a full-scale farm on their property, but starting with a small garden is just great. And then we also always encourage family engagement and also community engagement, and that helps to reinforce the lessons once the students leave the school and go home. So they're not only getting those foods while they're at school and learning about those things, but if you can get the families involved, that's going to make those lessons stick even stronger. So those are all some of the best practices that we've put together that really help, and I would encourage you to use those if you're thinking about planning your own programs. So I want to take this poll one more time just to see if you feel that this has helped you grow your familiarity of Farm to School while you're hearing about Vanessa giving all of the activities and the different ways that you can build your knowledge about the food system and what different types of activities can be involved in Farm to School. Oh, good. All right, so we've got half of you saying that you now feel fairly familiar with what Farm to School is, and 31% are saying very familiar. Excellent. That's wonderful. And nobody is saying not familiar at all, so that's great. Fabulous. Okay, so now we are going over to the question and answer and comment part of the presentation here. So please go ahead and type in your questions and then we'll get to them as they come in. So let me see here. So we have a question about where you can access the materials, the media materials that were shown on the screen at the last part of Vanessa's presentation. So those are available on IATP's website and they are available to download for free and then they're editable. So I can actually go back so you can look at them. Let me just go back here. Oops, daisy. Here they are. So you can see that it's actually possible to put in the picture of the farmer and the name of the farmer. And you can change the text and things. And there are also posters and there are stickers and banners, as well as this signage that you can put in your cafeteria. Those are available if you go to iatp.org /issue/farm-2-school. So that is also where you will find the curriculum itself. And I do want to mention that the curriculum is available for free. You can download it and you're able to download the entire package, or you can also download worksheets and handouts and the different lessons separately. So they are all available at that same place, the IATP Farm to School issue page. One question that we got last week that was relevant to what we're doing today, and Vanessa, I was wondering if you would have some thoughts about this, is how you might use the curriculum if you're not in a high school setting. How would you use the curriculum outside of that school setting?
Like if you're in a setting that's not affiliated with an actual school to implement some of the farm to school stuff?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's what they were asking.
I think that definitely the second lesson, the food system lesson, is really valuable and can be used in any kind of setting. It really is meant to educate students on what the food system is and how they can engage with it. So I think that one can be taken on independently outside of a school, as can the first one. I mean, all students, most students are in school, so learning about what farm to school is doesn't mean that students can't take that back and advocate for it within their environment. And I think the same goes for lesson 3. You know, school lunch, how does it really work? Those are all just kind of very educating students in the world that they live in. But I agree that there isn't necessarily that place to do a tie-in. Depending on what kind of environment you are teaching it in, if it's an after-school program, excuse me, you could maybe have the chance to put a meal on together or have some kind of event or a fundraiser where students are figuring out how to procure these local foods. So they're still figuring out what's local, what's in season, and doing that piece where they're connecting with the farmer. Or they could learn about, you know, soliciting donations from a local co-op or grocery store or something like that and put on some kind of event, even if it was just a picnic or something for themselves. And then, you know, you could tie in the promotional piece for that too. So I think that there's, you know, any way that students would be doing something along with food, whether they're soliciting food donations for another event that's going on, whether they're putting on a food-related event for themselves, or even working on who are local farmers and trying to just get them to come in and talk about farming. I think there's all of those communication and outreach and discovery pieces that could still be used.
Now we have a question here. Someone is asking, has the school used this toolkit or have students done all of these activities? If so, was there any challenges that the students experienced or successes? And they really love the idea of including the students in the procurement processes with the farmers. So yes, there are schools that have been using this toolkit. Initially, it was developed with Natasha Mortensen, and she is an agriculture educator in Minnesota. And she was doing these types of activities already, so she kind of built this program in her own agriculture education system at Morris High School. And so we really were capturing what she was doing and putting it down in a formal, published, written curriculum. So she had these activities and has been doing them for a long time. And I would say just the successes that have happened through that has just been her students' engagement. She's also very involved with the FFA, so she works a lot with the students and teaching them about agriculture and having them engage with their local agriculture scene. And they got to be more engaged and hands-on, and then they got to see the product of their work by doing these activities. And an interesting thing is that for her, she's been doing these activities for a couple years. So you might be thinking, oh, I could do this, but we can't really launch a full-scale program in just one semester or 1 year. But what happens is that if you keep doing these activities, it's actually like a baton that gets handed off from the older students to the younger. And the older students have leadership and they develop some of the program. And then they kind of, because they are involved, they get the younger students to be enthusiastic about it. And then when those younger students become the 11th and 12th graders and enroll in her classes, they pick up the baton and carry on where the previous students left off. So it's really been growing their program. I will say that one challenge is that sometimes it's not possible if you are in Natasha's position and you're an agriculture educator and you'd like to do something like this. Sometimes you will run into a roadblock where you can't really access the food service director, or maybe the food service director isn't as enthusiastic about the program as Natasha's food service director was. And I think that can be a bit of a challenge. I think the way that you can get around that, just because you can't actually implement in real life serving the foods in the meals, it doesn't mean that they can't do many of the activities that are involved. And even, just as Natasha mentioned, they can develop recommendations even if they can't be implemented. And you can do activities like a taste test or something that's outside of the actual official school meal if that ends up just being a challenge for you. And actually, maybe Vanessa, you might have we had another question that was a difficult one and we didn't get to it last week, and someone was asking, what do I do if my administration is not enthusiastic about the idea of farm to school? How do I convince the administration of the school or build some momentum to get a farm to school program started? And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Sure. There's two ways to go about it. One is by creating the student and the community demand, and in some cases when administrators see that students are really asking for something and understand what they're asking for and want to contribute to it, that can be really, really beneficial. The flip side is that farm to school programs, when you're looking at it at the lunchroom level, but also the community level, can do a lot to boost the image of a school. So in some cases, serving local foods in the cafeteria actually boosts participation. So when you think of school cafeterias as a restaurant, the more people that you're serving, the more income that you're generating, and that's a good thing. It can also generate a lot of goodwill for a school environment, and it can be a really good, a feel-good program. So it's almost, you can wage a PR campaign that, well, farm to school is good, but it makes the school look really good, and sometimes that's a good way to advocate for it. Mm-hmm. There is also the National Farm to School Network created a series of peer peer leader trainings, and one of them is on how to talk to administrators about the benefits of farm to school. And I believe if you go to farmtoschool.org and search their resources for administrator or peer leader, you should be able to find that training. And it actually is a bunch of resources, a PowerPoint training that you can use to either learn from or to share kind of why farm to school is important and how to get administrators on board. But it can kind of help you negotiate that that challenging system. And what we see is that usually if there's some kind of small success that you can present, like a small student survey that says they want farm to school, or if you do a tasting in the classroom and you can show kids are willing to actually try unusual fruits and vegetables, something that shows food service or school administrators, yeah, this is having kind of positive effect. You can take those baby steps to get where you want to go.
I also find that being empathetic to the difficulties that food service directors face, because the system is not set up to make it really easy for them to do this. So this is outside of their normal wheelhouse, and just acknowledging that and being really grateful and building a relationship with them is really important to these programs, because you don't want to do it in spite of them or against their will, and they are key partners to implementing these programs. And when you get a food service director that's enthusiastic, that's when the programs really take off. So I have definitely seen that that's vital. Let me see, so we have a couple more questions here. I see somebody talking about they started a school garden last year and it was a huge success, but they did find challenges in getting consistent help. This year, they're going to work on trying to control the weather more. I wish you good luck with that, because that has been tricky the last couple of years. And one thing that's really interesting about the last lesson of this curriculum is that it talks a lot about community engagement. And I totally recognize what you're saying about school gardens being challenging to maintain, especially during the summer if it's the opposite of when the kids are there. I've seen really successful programs where schools have partnered with youth engagement programs that operate in the summer around doing gardening and food education. And so they maintain the garden over the summer, and then the kids come back in the fall and they have a relationship where those groups work together and they kind of are working on opposite schedules so they can fill in. But I think there are a lot of other community partnerships that can help with that as well. Let's do one more question. So someone is asking Vanessa about the average cost of starting a farm to school program, and I think that also gets at the availability of, is there any financial support for people who want to start a farm to school program?
That is a really good question, and I think it goes back to Erin's slide of starting small. In theory and ideally, we encourage people to start farm to school programs without any extra money, or to think about doing it without any extra money. If you want, you can be able to work on, squeezing up an extra hour or two out of your time and getting a few community members and maybe other school educators or school staff on board with you and figuring out what your plan is. And that's actually the first step. You can kind of do that without any money. If you want to start a school garden, you can try and raise funds from community groups. Often people will donate in-kind materials like your raised bed materials or your plants or your small hand tools or things like that. Most oftentimes the school district will let you use water for free. In some cases, schools, will put in an extra water tap for you because they see the value in what you're doing. But it is possible to kind of start that infrastructure piece with not a lot of money. And we kind of encourage people to think about doing it without a lot of money, because then in some ways it's easier to not get in over your head. When you're talking about the school side, in the cafeteria, you can definitely do that without any extra money. You might need to have a community member or yourself or a school nurse or somebody who's on your wellness committee to maybe help facilitate some of the learning with your food service director. But food service directors do have money to buy food, and you can encourage them and support them to use that money to buy local and regional foods. There's free posters for cafeterias. You can make posters for your cafeterias, those kinds of things you can do without a lot of extra resources. Or if you feel like having a buffer would be great, you can find a community partner, either a local foundation or a grocery store, who maybe wants to support you with $500 or $1,000 to help you put a mural that shows local food in your cafeteria or something like that. And then when it comes to your classroom work or your curriculum work or something like implementing this curriculum, you can see you can do it within your classroom without, you need some extra elbow grease and some time to kind of get things going, but there aren't a lot of other resources that you need that cost money. So in theory, there is a totally bare bones way to do it, but yes, there are grants available. The USDA Farm to School grant has a planning grant as well as a support system grant, and the RFP for that will actually be opening, I think, within the next 2 weeks, but you can apply to have your school, or even better, a collection of schools, collaborate through the Farm to School planning process, and that pretty much gives you the staff time to have somebody kind of help coordinate that and get everybody on board. You can also work with partner organizations in your community to kind of help raise funds together and maybe buy some of their institutional time to help you and your school or a bunch of schools in your district or county get coordinated. So we encourage people to think about doing it on a shoestring budget, but if you feel like you're rolling along and you want more, there are some grant funds available for that.
And I'm noticing we're out of time, but I will say that this, the information about resources and money is also included in the curriculum. And I wanted to let you all know this webinar is going to be available, the recording of the webinar will be available on our website, as is part 1 of this webinar series. If you missed that last week, these are the links for that. But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Vanessa, for presenting today. It was just great to have you, and this was wonderful.
Thanks for the chance to be here. This was really fun.
All right. Have a wonderful week, everybody.